Hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Guys, I'm so excited today. I'm so excited because I lately have been binging on this man's fine work. And if you don't know who he is or haven't come across the shenanigans from the Evergreen State College yet, we're going to talk all about it today. So today I'm thrilled to have with me Benjamin Boyce. Benjamin Boyce is, and it's Benjamin and not Ben, I have learned from watching his content lately. Benjamin is a content creator focusing on investigative journalism and long form interviews. His topics of interest include postmodernist activism as it applies to race, gender, identity, and individuality. He has one cat at this time, but we won't hold that against him because we're dog people on this channel,
Oh,
Benjamin.
okay. You're not multiple cat people, you're dog people.
No, I am a dog person. I don't know about everyone else, but thank you so much for joining me today. Welcome.
Thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to have you pick my brain or pick your brain. We'll see who does the picking.
We'll see. We'll see. What happens. So, I mean, it's funny because I actually watched the first time I watched your series of videos on Evergreen State College. It was when you only had like 14 or 15 of them done,
Oh,
and now
okay.
you're up to 20.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I got sucked right into it at the time, and I recently rewatched all of the videos up to the 20, and oh my God, it is scary how what happened at Evergreen State College is now manifesting right in front of us on literally a worldwide scale.
Yeah. Yeah. I have to say, so I, I went to the Evergreen State College and I graduated 2 weeks after the protest, and I had watched, the proverbial water
Mm-hmm.
proverbially boil the proverbial frogs, and I was just kind of watching it, and then it went critical, and that was a pretty. I'm sorry, this is overused phrase, so it was pretty traumatizing a little bit. I was rather like, what the heck is going on? And so I did those. I started reporting on it because I was at the college and I had access. I knew the names, I knew where to look for the videos and the emails, and I knew all the lingo. And it was a hot story, and and I reported on it thoroughly. And then I started like trying to do my finishing touch, like that
Mm-hmm.
end, the capstone, project on top of all the research that I did, and. And towards and I kept on reporting on the Evergreen State College, and up until like 6 weeks ago, I guess now, I would get comments on my videos like, why are you beating this dead horse? You're beating a dead horse. I'm like, I know, I'm just trying to be a completionist. And then all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden the entire world starts to do the same thing. I'm like, don't do it, please don't.
Everything happens for a reason. We are getting some people chatting in saying your audio levels are about half as my is
Okay.
they're low, so maybe we can
uh
ping those up a little bit.
how is that? How is that?
It's louder to me, guys in chat. Is that let us know if you can keep chatting in if Benjamin's audio needs to be turned up more.
Okay, just let me
Now,
know.
so for people who maybe haven't come across the Evergreen State College stuff yet, or maybe have only seen a couple videos on it here and there, because it's funny when that actually all happened. I worked in higher education for about 10 years, and I was in my last higher ed job when all this was going down. I was working for a higher education consulting company, and I remember we were watching all this from afar going, whoa, that's crazy town what's happening out there.
Yeah.
But it's even crazier when you get into your footage, which I didn't see for the first time until like a couple months ago. So give us an overview. What
Okay.
happened at Evergreen State College?
Okay, so what happened that got the media's attention is that there all of a sudden appeared on the internet this live stream footage of these protesters cornering faculty and staff, and screaming and yelling at them, and acting in a completely inappropriate manner. At least at that point in history, that would have been considered inappropriate behavior. Um, and it had this overarching narrative about these students who are mostly black, and then their white allies. They had already segregated themselves in their behavior, and if you look at the story, the thing that kind of made it click for people was that the Evergreen State College had a traditionally annual kind of event called the Day of Absence, which was based on a Douglas Turner Ward play about this southern town where the black people absented themselves from the town to show how integral they were to the workings of the town. And it was kind of a show of, just of how interconnected everybody was based on this, these different racial markers that have a lot of weight to them. So what traditionally Evergreen State College set up events off of campus for the students of color, so-called, to congregate and to do community building and solidarity building. And then there would be a day of presence where everybody would kind of get together a couple days later and have like a festival or something. And over the course of, the years, and I think this was implemented in the late 70s or the mid 70s, but over the last, probably 10 years, that community building aspect of it became more and more community criticizing aspect of it, more and more talking about this thing called whiteness, and more using these critical race studies kind of frameworks to talk more and more about oppression. But in the winter of 2017, the administration and faculty decided to reverse that day, and encourage is one word that they actually use, and require is another word that they actually use. But according to the marketing department, they invited white students and faculty to attend seminars off of campus and, to center the campus on the students of color. So they had events on the campus. And Brett Weinstein, who was a professor of evolutionary biology at the time, he made some emails saying that it's one thing for a group to voluntarily absent themselves from the campus. It's a whole other, issue if the campus is asking you not to come to campus based on your race. So that was kind of the narrative that made the Evergreen State College protests salient. But underneath that was so much more going on. And so what I ended up doing was showing how there was a nest of ideas that were facilitating and promoting the students to act in this way.
Yeah, and that's what I found so fascinating about your series is it wasn't just this crazy protest happened and this campus got taken over. I mean, you really went into the whole backstory because you were a student there when this was happening, right?
Yeah. I started in 2013,
Mm-hmm. And you started as an adult student. So you weren't, fresh out of high school. You had life experience.
My immaturity was a different caliber than the immaturity of the students that I was learning along with. But yeah, I was 36 when I started.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Gen Xer kind of thing. So I had a different framework that I was operating under.
What did that feel like? I mean, and you've obviously done an incredible amount of reflection on your experiences there, but, what did that feel like to you when you saw this unfolding right in front of you? Did you have any idea it was going to be as significant as it was? Actually, can you ping up your volume a little bit more? People are still saying I'm much louder. Which I'm sorry, I'm loud, guys. Okay. It's my fault.
The only thing is, I just don't want to get into the red. I don't want to tear. All right.
Maybe I'm gonna turn mine down and you can turn yours up, and we'll see if we meet in the middle.
We'll meet in the middle. Benjamin, you're my button. What's your name? Not Claire Danes, the other Claire. Not Claire. Anyways, what was the question again? Was it weird, strange?
Yeah. What was it like to actually be there and watch that all unfold?
Well, in 2015, a new president came on and I was working media. I worked in the media department. So I was on camera or behind camera or manning the camera, which you're not supposed to say anymore. I was personing the camera for most of these events. So if you actually scrub the footage, you'll see me in the room. Like, you can't see how aghast my face is because it's behind the camera. But in 2015, two other things happened. The Evergreen State College president, George Bridges, comes onto the scene, and he reframes the entire college around social justice very explicitly. He says that the civil rights movement has done a lot of strides, but we are nowhere near finished, and we need to have these conversations about race and inequality and privilege and all this stuff. So I highly recommend you go down these things. That happened that same September. was when the University of Chicago released a letter called the Chicago Principles, saying that we will not have any safe spaces. Like, we are here, your education is about debating ideas. And George Bridges, the president of the Evergreen State College, wrote a counter article to that, saying no, college students need safe spaces. And I just think that's really interesting. Like, that's a background. Also, that was the same time, and you know what, I might be wrong here. The Chicago letter might have been in 2016. But anyways, in 2015, the event happened at Yale, where the Professor Christakis, two professors, the wife professor writes this blog post or this letter to the campus about being able to be an adult for yourself and choosing what Halloween costume you want to wear. Don't let the administration coddle you and tell you not to be offensive. You are adults. You can make the decision on your own. That caused, an uprising because nominally the black students wanted that coddling, and they thought that was an invitation for micro and macro aggressions. And there's this really interesting piece of footage where Nicholas Christakis is, really patiently trying to rationally speak with the uprising students or the agitated students about liberalism, about freedom of speech, about critical thought and open debate, and they're screaming at him and getting like really weepy and histrionic. And the famous line from that is this black student eventually gets so agitated, she says, "This is not about creating an intellectual space. This is about creating a home here."
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then one other event that happened in 2015 at the same time, this little known Canadian professor named Jordan Peterson, or Jordan B. Peterson, if you're having a hard time finding him on the internet, he kind of stood up against this Canadian legislation called Bill C-16, which in his mind was it was about extending the Canadian civil rights to include gender and gender representation as a protected category. And Jordan B. Peterson made a statement about how that is kind of basically compelled speech, which means that the government can basically litigate if you don't say the words that other people want you to say. And he was also protested at the same time. And so off of the Evergreen State College campus, I saw the wave. I saw the tremors of campus illiberalism backfiring on itself and really, damaging or potentially damaging the ability for a college to function as a place of learning. And so when I attended these orientations and seminars that the Evergreen State College faculty, empowered by the George Bridges administration, were putting students through, and I saw these incredibly strong illiberal statements being made by the professors about how Evergreen is a white supremacist institution and we need to teach white people about their privilege, and we need to stop the people of color from being oppressed by the privilege of this institution. And a lot of statements that I can't recall totally, but I lay that out, and I'm sitting there on camera. I'm like, this isn't going to end well. I'm watching my professors go backwards in time, like really regress into this, one, incredibly religious mindset. And I grew up in church. My father's a pastor. So I noticed the tone of everything was shifting into a very religious sort of mindset, coupled with this incredibly racist or racializing frame of mind that divided everybody up based on their race, assigned them privilege or oppression, and then worked to decrease one's privilege and, decrease one's privilege and decrease one's oppression. So everybody's the same, but in practice, and we can get into this more, you can't actually decrease somebody's privilege in a learning environment. You can't stop somebody from being intelligent. You can't dampen somebody's engagement with the material. And that's what they wanted to do. I was explicitly asked to calm down as a learner so that people who were not interested in the material could have more room to be interested. But that's not how interest, curiosity, and intelligence work.
Right. And actually I watched a clip of you last night talking about this where I think you had just started as a student and you went into one of your classes and you asked questions of the other students and did what college students are supposed to do. And you were kind of not necessarily given a little slap on the wrist, but told kind of, be a little quieter so that other people can speak up. And the people that the professor wanted to speak up were literally sleeping through class. They didn't want to.
Literally. That was my second day of class, and that was very interesting to me. My professor, who I'm just going to name her, Lisa Sweet, was my professor, and I deeply admire her skill as an artist. She's an artist, but I strongly question how this theology, which she has taken from Robin DiAngelo, who is the author of White Fragility, is probably going to be, if Biden gets elected, Robin DiAngelo is probably going to be Betsy DeVos's replacement. It's like this stuff is coming down the pipes. White fragility and white privilege will be assigned to you to take in every major corporation and institution of higher education, and probably the government from now on. So This is very important stuff to understand. But in practice, I saw how my professor would try to restrain us engaged people, which ended up being older students, which ended up being like white men, trying to restrain us, to assign us less engagement with the material in order to give room for these marginalized people, in her eyes, to be more engaged. But every time, there was this one class where she really, really wanted these students to be engaged. So she said, everybody can only speak twice, right? Which, it's one thing if she would have said, everybody's required to speak twice, but she's like, everybody can only speak twice. So us normal people who were like wrestling with these ideas about iconoclasm, which is really interesting, about the destruction of images, which is really interesting in this cultural moment that we're in. Like we are living through a rebooted cultural revolution. But anyway, so we would end up, the older students, the more engaged students, we just disengaged. So everybody in the class was disengaged. And I remember she looking at me, my professor looking at me and like wanting me to step in. I'm like, well, I'm a white male. I can't talk anymore. Like maybe I'm going to want to say something later on down the road. So it's a very backwards ideology that is so certain of its righteousness and its correctness. And I use that term not only in the politically correct phrase, but in its correctness of thinking. It really thinks it's right, that it can't even like criticize itself. It can't even look at how it's actually acting.
Well, and that's one of the most bizarre things to me about this, because I was determined to ignore Robin DiAngelo for as long as I possibly could, because I had gotten wind of it. I know that, so I watched you on Unsafe Space, which is my favorite channel. I think it was like last week or so. So I know about the stuff that went on in the knitting community, because you guys talked about that briefly. I was a knitter. That's how I got introduced to all of this nonsense, and we can possibly talk about that if you want. But actually, there is. Okay, so quick aside, funny story. Please. So it has to do with all of this. We're going to come around back. So in the knitting community, this started as a joke. It started as a joke that knitting green socks is a racist action. It started as a joke. No, not because of Pepe. It's because of something else. So it started. So in the knitting community, the knitters have been fighting back against the SJWs, and a lot of people post videos saying, the bullying is wrong. I don't support it. So one woman posted a video basically saying, I didn't speak up when it first started, but I want to speak up now, and I'm sorry I didn't speak up earlier. When she posted the video, she posted it to her Instagram with a photo of her wearing a pair of green socks. And one of the SJWs, oh, this gets even better. One of the SJWs liked the green socks, and because they spy on each other. So her friends spied on her, noticed she liked this photo, called her out. A dramatic public apology was issued. And from there on forward, we started joking that knitting green socks was racist. And then someone else took it and ran with it, and it became a real thing. But in the midst of this, we were actually talking, and they're actually in my Instagram comments to this day, about what if we can convince some college administrator somewhere that the color green is racist? And as soon as we see a news story about a college with green as their school color changing it, we will know this has gone too far. And we were briefly plotting. We were like, we need to get Benjamin Boyce on the line, and he needs to point us to someone at Evergreen State College. to try to convince them that the color green is racist. But anyway, where was I going with that? Oh, Robin DiAngelo. So I was determined to ignore this woman for as long as possible. And then this crap started making its way into organizations. Because I'm an organizational psychologist. This is, what I do in the real world when I'm not doing this. And I have to tell you, I don't know of a single client I have right now, or that I have worked with, frankly, ever, that is not telling their employees to read White Fragility. And it is mind-boggling to me, because there are very real discussions to have about race and diversity and inclusivity in all walks of life, but certainly in the workplace. There are real discussions you can have. But when the only discussion is all white people are racist and have always been racist and will always be racist, and if you push back on this idea that you're racist, that is more proof that you're racist. I mean, there's no there. There's nowhere to go with it. Mm-hmm. You've actually sat through training with Robin DiAngelo, haven't you?
Oh no. Well, she came to the Evergreen State College and gave 2 lectures, if I'm recalling correctly, in 2016. So I have pored over those lectures and watched her ideas be regurgitated by her followers, or the the diversity trainers and stuff. So I've received or undergone permutations of her re-education. Yes.
Oh, by the way, we have a whole bunch of knitters watching us right now, so they may have some very pointed questions for you. Be careful. We have sharp sticks and we know how to use them, Benjamin. So here's the question I have for you, as someone that was immersed in that environment. What is so enticing about this ideology? What is it that just sucks people who are smart people into it?
It is I'm going to steal from Mike Nina, who I had on my channel a couple weeks ago. He's a filmmaker in Australia, and he came out with the first and probably the most readily accessible Evergreen State College documentary. And it's in 3 parts, and you should check it out if you just want the short version. My version is different. But he talks about this ideology as kind of like a virus that attaches itself to the caring receptors. And that's what it really does. It bypasses your brain. It has nothing to do with your thought processes. It very much calls upon, and I'm going to say something, and I don't mean this offensively at all, but in aggregate, women have certain sorts of orientations towards the world, which are very good at attending to the raising of individuals. And that has to do with a very strong motherly bond and a caring relationship where the woman processes facilitates caring in order to create children. And I see it a lot in a pattern of behavior called, I'm sorry, I don't mean this derogatorily, and I'm having a problem with this word. There's this Karen meme, and there's this high propensity of women to be possessed by this ideology really quickly, and a lot of very empathetic men too. And I'm a very empathetic man too, so I would interact with it, but have a very strong negative reaction to it, because I felt that it was parasitizing my caring by infantilizing the marginalized. It turns them into infants that you then go and you care for. And a lot of Robin DiAngelo, and this is kind of an archetypal. I'm a poet, so I rely on poetic reasoning. There's this twisted kind of motherliness that's going on in her. I'm going to care for you. I know how to care for you. It's this very consuming mother, this very clutching mother. And I saw that a lot of academic females who didn't have children for one reason or another then caused the students to become children and then completely guard them like a mother would from any sort of criticism. So if you look at how the world reacted to Evergreen, was very strongly negative because of the way that the students were acting. And the professors who more or less put them up to that, kind of circled the wagons and coddled them and gave them attention and supported them in a way that actually shielded them from actually examining why those ideas caused their behavior, why their behavior is wrong, and why their behavior is actually not just wrong in, like just a human being acting sense, but destructive to the entire project of learning, of gaining a skill, and so on.
I mean, I'd actually never thought about it in that way before. So they're very literally finding a way to mother these populations. And isn't it funny that a lot of these people, and I'm going to make a broad generalization, but I'm probably going to stand behind it. A lot of the women that I see doing this don't actually have kids.
There's this interesting dynamic. I think I, I think there's a circuitry that is preying upon that women, human beings are really similar. Like I have that same circuitry too, but women have a more propensity to do that. And it's almost like if one hasn't gone through the steps of having a child and raising the child, that circuitry is dormant, but it's just waiting to be triggered. And this stuff just flips it into overgear or into high gear. And because it's based on identity politic, there's these really weird currents of, it becomes incredibly racist in its superior. I'm the white savior of the world. I'm like a white Jesus, where I can take the suffering of all mankind upon my shoulders and deliver you to salvation. Just listen to me, bow to you. Just watch me wash your feet. Watch me bow unto you, and say that I need to give up all of my resources for you because of the bad father that has raped and pillaged this whole land, unjustly built all these buildings and constructed this wonderful economy upon stolen land or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Now, in your series, you really focus in on Naima Lowe as kind of one of the chief protagonists, I suppose, in this story.
Yeah.
But so give me a little bit more background on that, because, well, you go ahead.
Okay, well, I there's ethical problems to telling this story because I basically try to see the humanity in everybody, in all the actors. Like George Bridges is probably kind of the chief like bad guy in my mind of this whole debacle. Like a very weak leader is just the worst. It's worse than a tyrant because it's tyranny, but it's passive aggressive tyranny. So I do want to reserve the fact that I've studied Naima Lowe by her behavior, and I'm sure that there's causes for this behavior that could be accessed and understood in terms of mental health and in terms of just wayward intentions. But the Evergreen State College is set up in such a way that it can facilitate very deep, close relationships between professors and students. You don't take, when in the typical quarter, you don't take your math and then your biology and then a writing course. You take one program that has all these components in it. So conceivably, you could take one course that would last the entire year with 2 or 3 professors and really get into the material and form really deep bonds. Naima Lowe taught, I guess, cultural, media studies, I guess. And I would see her teach because I worked in the media department, and I would, facilitate her workshops and stuff just with regarding filmmaking. I was a literature student, but I ended up making films at the end of this. And she was a film student or film teacher who I never took. I didn't take any courses from her, but it's interesting. So there's this kind of parallel dynamic between, here's somebody who professes to be a master of this form, creating art that I think is very subpar and is justified in its atrociousness, like literal atrociousness, because of a twisted form of a postmodern conception of destroying and dismantling everything that is excellent and beautiful in the world, in this twisted kind of vengeance upon culture or something. I don't really understand it. Or I guess we could just kind of go around and if you look at her art, it's very obsessed with being ugly. And one thing that she produced at one point was called 39 Questions for White People. And in the video that I ended up making specifically about her in the complete Evergreen story, it's episode 15, I think. It's got like a very different title from everything else. And what I did conceptually was I took like cheesy, pretentious college media student styles of just like throwing everything in there and being really ostentatious with all the styles and the editing and like super cheesily produced. And then I cut up and I spliced and I used her material to deconstruct her ideology. And in that video, I frameworked it around 39 questions for white people. And it seemed like she's very obsessed with whiteness as this entity that was always restraining her, always, kind of dictating the world in a very Gnostic fashion. It's like there's this dark God, and just a sub note, certain strains of feminism have developed a similar idea of patriarchy as this dark god that's controlling everything behind the scenes that needs to be constantly dismantled, which is a very Gnostic, which is a ancient religion kind of, you conceive of the world as constructed by a god that it has bad intentions for us. And you have to constantly become aware through these meditation and these chants and this gnosis, right? This you become aware of it, and critical theory, as applied to race, does that with whiteness. Certain strains of feminism do that with regards to patriarchy. And if you actually look at Naima Lowe's life, she's always been in a privileged environment. It seems to me, and I don't have the documents on this, but I have had other people that know her, that she's always been in an environment where she was the only black person surrounded by white people. And the way that she could stand out and capitalize on that was to make the race issue like the central way of relating to one another. And I do have eyewitness accounts from people who worked with her in the capacity of teaching, and she was very much a bully. She was always controlling whatever meeting she was in and doing a lot of demands and leaning on people, and there was just a lot of just kind of allowing her to do that and not standing up against her because she's just her, and it just kind of reached a critical mass when there was two young black men who were shot in 2015, which is another key moment in the story. And they were shot because they were shoplifting, and then they attacked a police officer with their skateboards. And all that stuff is ignored because they're black and they got shot by the police. That was the only narrative that really made sense. And that's when you have this facilitating event that justifies the outburst that we see with George Floyd. There's this one emblematic event that just is just the tinder that completely ignites the silo in a way. And what happened right before the protests was that the two young black men were actually what's the correct word? They were sentenced. They were punished, but they were found guilty of assault, and the police officer was excused for what he did. And then these two young black men who were caught up in the systemic system, who have no responsibility on their own for their own actions, were unjustly accused by the system of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and unfortunately assaulting a police officer, which
just happens.
So they were found guilty, and then that kind of was another aspect of her losing it. I consider.
What confuses me is I don't understand why she gained so much power, because she seemed to just flout everything about the system. Like, I mean, there was, I remember the faculty meeting. She said, "I don't even come to these faculty meetings because you all are racist," and all this stuff. And in my life, I kind of try to keep myself a little purposefully naive sometimes, because I think it helps me to lead a more happy existence, honestly, than if I allow myself to get sunk into these things. And I'm equating that back to this because I don't understand why people are so attracted to people who are just overtly negative in their actions towards other people. What made her so powerful in this scenario?
It it's the system of thought. It completely owes to this network of ideas that have been kind of evolutionarily sculpted by being kind of argued over and over again in the academy. And it has to do with grievance studies or critical theory, which I couldn't really give you a salient, blow by blow on. My brain doesn't work that way. But if you see, and I've tried to reconstruct this in the footage from prior seminars, you see the implementation of this idea that we live in an unjust society, and that everybody, the individual's behavior doesn't really matter. The individual act of racism doesn't really matter because the racism in our society is systemic. It's behind the scenes. And so if somebody, and you see this in the footage when one of the lead protesters, Jamil, and Shamerica, and then a couple, the lead protesters are in the room with George Bridges, and they're giving him demands, and they're eating pizza and talking about how oppressed they are. And they're like, you know what? It doesn't matter if they did anything wrong. It's that the fact that we say that we feel unsafe, you should fire these people because we feel unsafe. That should be enough for you because we are here, and it's not our job to be doing this right now. This is your job. This is your work that you should be doing because we are oppressed.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
they seem so obsessed with money, with the fact that people get paid to do those
labor,
jobs,
yeah.
and getting paid for their own emotional labor. And I mean, they seem to go after everyone who has a job there. I mean, one of the things I found most shocking was the cafeteria worker, the cook, who they descended upon. I don't know, what is that main kind of cafeteria called?
It's called the Greenery, but it's the cafeteria.
Yeah,
it's probably racist now.
Oh, I'm sure
it's Greenery.
It's racist. Can't have that. But they all descended on the Greenery, and I guess after, like, right around the time it was closing, and just demeaned this poor cook for not making them their food fast enough and not letting them into the fridge themselves, and felt completely justified in doing it.
Yeah. There's it mobilizes. This is one of my hypotheses about this network of ideas that we're all going to just have to swallow now, is that what it does is that it preys upon people's care, their concern, right? It also preys upon niceness and politeness. And people who are very polite and nice and conscientious just defer to it. Like, well, I don't want to be mean. You're saying that if I say this thing, it's actually a mean thing. I don't want to be mean. So I'll give you my. It starts with controlling your language. I think Jordan Peterson was right. Okay, I'll just put my pronouns out there, not understanding that once you destabilize pronouns, you can then go on to destabilize sex and gender, and then start to play some really interesting games with sex and gender once you force the nice people to say, oh, well, it's rude, for me to not go along with your idea. But also, well, okay, well, it's rude. It's not nice for me to, if you're saying that I'm racist, that's not something that I want to be, because racism isn't nice. So I guess I am racist. So I don't really understand your experience. So me asking you to think clearly, to calm down, and to make an argument, that's actually me oppressing you.
Right. Right.
So
because they
really
can't be
do
expected to control themselves and act like adults. No, because they're children.
They are children, and they come from a more authentic culture. And you see this, it's incredibly racist. It's incredibly racist. They go on, there's one little moment in one of the found footage, and it's actually just audio, where this student is so enraged at Brett Weinstein. He says, stop using reason and logic and white forms of knowledge to control this conversation, or to do something like that. And okay, so reason and logic are white forms of knowledge. So we should not expect anybody other than white people to be nice, to be civil, to be logical, right? This is incredibly so it's so egregiously racist that the nice person can't even say that. They're like, well, this doesn't seem right, but you're saying I'm going to be nice and I'm going to let this happen. What that facilitates is people who don't give a shit about being nice, which I would describe as narcissistic sociopaths. People with no conscientiousness, to then start to game the system, whether they're white or black. Like they understand that now I can control. This is a method of destroying the checks and balances in a community that restrain the narcissistic sociopaths from taking it over. Like where personal responsibility and meritocracy are what is the most valued thing in any, that's the positive feedback loop. That's how we grade whether or not we like your contribution is worthwhile. Now that's not the case. Now it's that you have to prove that you are oppressed or are fighting for the oppressed, which is now it's so diffuse. It's completely unmoored from actual like I was oppressed in this very instant. No, I was descendant from an oppressed minority, or I have a oppressed personality of some sort, or
Right.
I'm fighting for the oppressed people. So that's what we're going to see, and it's going to take effect in different ways in different organizations. But that's my hypothesis, that what we have lost is our ability to restrain the worst of us.
No, I completely agree with you. And now we're seeing this make its way into math education. Math is now racist. Science is now racist. Yeah. There was that professor at, I want to say it was at Berkeley, and he's an accounting professor. And because he did not give his Black students leniency on one of their exams, he was reprimanded by the institution for not doing that. I mean, accounting is a very mathematical profession. You either know how to do it or you don't. And it's one of those things that, here's my question. Do you think the people that are reinforcing this in universities have given any thought to the broader implications of what happens when these students go out and now don't know how to function or do their jobs or do the things that they should have learned with their degree in the real world?
Okay. It's educational malpractice or malfeasance. I strongly believe that it's not a sin, it should be a crime. This is a total crime. Because what they are actually doing, and you see this on the West Coast, what you see is that these students are offered college education, and then within the college education that they're offered, like let's just say, let's strip it of the racial thing, and just say low-income first-generation students are offered free rides into college. Then within these colleges, there is this attitude just within, we'll just talk about grammar, that teaching somebody proper grammar is actually stripping them of their cultural heritage, right? So that's a big no-no. That is a form of oppression. So you don't do that. You commiserate and you foster their voice and their empowerment.
It's so funny actually you say that. Sorry to interrupt, but I have a key point on that one specifically. It's so funny that you say that because I remember distinctly about 3 years ago, I was working with a lot of organizations that had a lot of young professionals, and I was having to teach these kids how to write. I'm like, this is not what I'm doing, but this is the situation I'm in because these kids are graduating and they don't know how to write.
Yeah. And so what happens is that the student pays the money, probably loan, to this institution that is selling them a bill of goods that it doesn't give them. Instead of giving them skill, it gives them what it calls empowerment. It makes them feel very good about themselves. You go there and you are a king and they serve you. They give you whatever you want. Credit, food, whatever. You paid the money already. We're here for you. It's a service model. So then the student plings a bunch of money, gets this piece of paper that says they can do something. They can't actually do it. And they get hired, and the company finds out that they can't do it. And either the company now spends resources to teach them, or the student is told to go to a private tutor and then spend actual money for actual skill. So it is a crime. It's criminal. It's I don't know the right word because I'm not a criminologist, but it's criminal.
Well, and here's what happens though now, because now all the HR offices have bought into this stuff. They all have diversity people now. And so when they tell the person, you need to go learn how to write in order to do this job, the person then goes to HR and says, I'm being oppressed by my boss. Yeah. And HR doesn't do anything. HR is like, oh, okay, well, you don't have to go do this then if it makes you happy. When I think this started, it's so funny. I remember about 15 years ago, maybe a little less than that, but it was between 10 to 15 years ago, in higher education, there was this good dude named Clay Christensen who basically came out and said, in 10 years, half of the colleges in the country are going to have to fold because they're not going to be financially viable. They aren't recruiting enough students. They don't have the money to succeed and all this stuff. And so what happened at that point is that all of these college presidents, because it was a good time in the there was something going on in the economy at that time, and debt was very, very cheap. And so all of these college presidents started making these major infrastructure investments to make these campuses like, luxury campuses with the best housing and the best gym and all this stuff to woo all these students and to give them this great experience. So they spend their 25, 30, $45,000 a year in tuition and just, and they can remain financially viable. And this was a big thing. I mean, basically there were very few colleges that were left unscathed in this whole thing, but then they all have increased competition for these students. And so then they started hiring all these people that were around student success and student experience. And as it kept going, they were just coddling these students and giving them more and more and more of what they wanted to keep the tuition dollars there. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know. Is there some there with these things being connected?
It's absolutely connected. And this is another, this isn't a hypothesis. This is a prediction. Just looking at what happened at the Evergreen State College and applying that as a predictive model. So it might not be true, but this is kind of my prediction. What we're experiencing now is kind of the outburst of the protest. We had a lot of bottled up energy. And if you actually look at what happened at the Evergreen State College, there's all this this rhetoric and these ideas that facilitated what happened, but there's also just biological reality to this. It was spring, right? Olympia is very oppressive because it's raining all the time. And now you have like sun, right? Which has a very strong effect on young people. They're filled with hormones. They need to burst out. Also, you have the effect of admissions, the admissions office making Evergreen, I think, 98.7% acceptance rate, right? So you have a lot of college students who aren't college ready. The college hobbling its own ability to bring the students who don't belong there up to speed, and instead of just thrusting them in to these courses, and the students see that they are going to fail. All right, so like, I'm not doing my work. It must be because I'm oppressed. It must be because of the system. And I have it recorded. I have it on film where one of the main guys, one of the main administrators who recruits low-income students is talking to them about revolution, is saying that, in 1957, they hunted us in the streets and now it's no different. They're just passive aggressive about it. Instead of attack dogs, they have grades and expectations. And what happened in the Caribbean, my family, we rose up and we took over the island. And in the back is one of the key protesters, like in this island in the middle of the woods. So they were given a way out. Anyway, so the arc. So let's put that on what happened. All of a sudden, the government says there's a disease, like there's this major disaster. Everybody has to go home. Everything's shut down. Everything is now virtual. If you're a young student, well, if you're young, all of your life is now, you can't go outside, you can't expend the energy. You are now literally, suppressed, let's say, not oppressed, but you're suppressed. And there's a biological need for you to get the fuck out there. Hell be damned. Grandma cough her lung out. I don't care. I have to get outside. I have to do something with this energy. So, and I have a very cynical idea here that there's also something going on with the fact that that virus called Corona or COVID,
whatever it's called these days,
that was allowed to get out of control by a certain government, who was kind of responsible for the outbreak, just kind of allowed it to go around the world because that government didn't have to then suffer the economic consequences on its own. It could share those economic consequences with the rest of the world. And it would be about now that most people would be saying, this government has done us wrong and needs to be held accountable. And it's very...
One would think.
Very not efficient, but interesting that now all of a sudden every major news organization except a couple are now pushing this narrative that has nothing to do with the actual crisis that we are undergoing on an economic level. It's like now it's all about this other thing. It preys upon a weakness of our country that America has. There's an absolute true original sin that can be applied to America called slavery. There's a weakness, and there's also a weakness. There's a propensity for well-meaning people to want to make amends for sin. If you say that they did something wrong, they will want to do something about that. So I was going somewhere. I keep on getting distracted. But so we have this outburst. The outburst is only going to last so long because that energy can't be sustained. What's coming in the wake, and we already see that now, is a whole armada of bureaucracy. And that's what happened at the Evergreen State College. The ultimate outcome of the protest was a complete decimation of the legitimacy of the institution on one level as an education process. Even if you wanted to study social justice protesting, you would not choose Evergreen because they did it so horribly, and every other college in the world is now offering that. So why would you go there if they're showing you even the product? Even if you want that product, it's a bad product. But also, the Bridges administration used that to reorganize, to shut down lines of communication between faculty, to shut down dissent, and to insert all these offices of thought control, $160,000 a year positions of, equity, diversity, which basically amounts to these ritual days. It's completely, you just hire a priest that goes around and causes you to repent for your whiteness. Literally, you go and you repent for your whiteness, and then you have a celebration of another culture. It's a religion, and that's what's going to swoop in. So it's one, the administrators are going to come out as like, okay, well, we can control our workers more, or our faculty more through this, because now they can be reported for not following in line within this incredibly porous kind of offense culture that could be anything at any time. We can serve the students better, and we're less liable if the student accuses us of something because we have all this other stuff in place. So ultimately, I think that the outcome of these current unrest right now, as long as we don't go full cultural revolution, and it seems like people want to go full cultural revolution, in which case there's another timeline that I think we're toying with, but ultimately the bureaucrats are going to come out ahead.
Okay. So I have a question about what happened after the protest, but before we get there, I have another one that I want to make sure I don't let go of, because, you just talked about how people go to these trainings, they go to these seminars, and their only thing there is to repent of their sins and to admit that they are racist and all of these things. I was watching some of your older clips with my husband last night, and I turned to him and I said, do they ever actually try to fix the systemic racism? Do they ever actually make any concerted efforts to fix the things that are wrong with the system? Or is it just about saying, I am a bad person, please forgive me, throughout all of these seminars?
Ultimately, how can you fix something that's invisible and that's in the water? I mean, if you really take Robin DiAngelo seriously, how can you fix whiteness? How do you fix whiteness? White genocide would be your only actual material fix. Okay, well, wipe out the white people. I'm sorry, but what else is she actually proposing? You destroy your culture, and then you just destroy the white people. I'm sorry, I'm not on board with the white genocide theory. I'm just saying that. Yeah. What are you supposed to do to fix that?
Well, I guess from my perspective, I think we need to separate out serious conversations about race from SJW nonsense. I'm going to call it. All of this is like SJW nonsense, right? I put Robin DiAngelo squarely in the SJW nonsense category. But if we want to have a serious conversation about race, and this is my perspective, and you're welcome to disagree with it, I promise I won't be offended. But there are certain foundational elements of this country that were built 200 years ago, upon which every other element has been built on top of. So think of it as like the foundation of the house. It was built when we were actually a racist country, when there was very legitimate systems of racism and legitimate structural problems with the system that were put in place specifically to keep everyone separate and to keep the two races in their own proper place, or black and white at that time. And every other part of the system has been built on top of those things. And so when we're talking about systemic racism, I think, it can go one of two ways. It can go into the category of SJW nonsense, or it can go into the category of saying, you know what, there are legitimate things that maybe we can go back and think about the foundation in which these elements of our society were built on, and then we can make changes to help remove any remaining elements that are going to prevent everyone from having equal access to opportunity. So I think that's a real conversation to be had, but that conversation never seems to be had because they just want to complain and be angry all the time about how oppressed they are.
That conversation has been. I I kind of want to disagree with the way that you constructed that because
Okay.
if was the civil rights movement in the '60s built upon slavery? Is
No,
that something that relies upon slavery, like the roof relies on the foundation
no,
or
I'm
something?
well, I mean, I was gonna say no, but I think you could make an argument that in some respects was. It was, I mean, that was the fundamental thing that made that a necessary part
Yeah,
of our evolution as a country.
yeah, but it was an evolution, so that was a revision of the foundation.
Mm,
I would argue
okay.
it was an extension of the values and a refinement of what these values mean. Like
Well,
what is that core value? We the people, and people, everybody's created equal, right? Equal before God, equal under the law. And civil rights were saying no, this is not this behavior over here is not in line with this core value. So let's fix that to return to this core value of we the
yeah.
people.
But I don't know that I would argue that it was or a revision so much as because I mean, listen, like I remember when I was in college, I did like alternative spring break, and I went with a bus full of people from Boston to where the heck did we go to a very rural town in Mississippi. And it was right on the border of like Mississippi and Arkansas, and we helped out in the schools down there for a week. And there even and this was back, oh god, I'm gonna confess how old I am. Well, most people already know that watch me how old I am. It was like back in the early 2000s, so it was like 2002 or 2000. I think it was 2002. And in that small rural town that we went to, there was very distinct racial lines. Black people lived in the poor part of town. White people lived in the rich part of the town. The main landlord in the
Okay.
town refused to rent any of his properties to black people, so they were
Yeah.
inherently segregated, and
Okay.
the black people went to the public school and the white kids went to the much better private school.
Yeah.
And so for me, I mean, that's still something that we can look back and say, you know what, that probably could do with a little revision. That's
Yeah.
not good.
Yeah. 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 So we're shifting the conversation to actual. Well, I this is where the conversation is. Like, what is the actual material conditions that we can change in order to give people equal access to X, Y, and Z?
Right.
Education, housing, healthcare. Let's just say
Mm-hmm.
education, housing, healthcare. The I think one could create a system of discourse around which most people, left, right, well, most people, left and right, would find themselves in the center of working towards this common goal of access to X, Y, and Z. It is thoroughly corrupted by Marxist rhetoric that goes overboard and says we just need to take all of the resources. There's this video that I put up on Sunday of this Indiana University
Yeah.
equity symposium. And what the head of the HR said is that that it's a false conception that white people are the mean and we just need to raise up black people, right? No, white people are above, and so what we need to do is to level the playing field,
Right.
which is pretty big statement. So what they want to do is Robin Hood. There's virtue. They want to tear down everything that the white people have in the hopes that just apparently the wealth will flow and everybody's equal.
Right.
There's big problems with that I would argue. And the biggest problem that I can see from just somebody who's more of a cultural critic and just looking at it from a sociological, literary lens is that what you had at the Evergreen State College and what you're having now is that people don't focus on the structure. Like when people are agitated and people are going to overthrow things, they don't focus on whiteness. And this happened at the Cultural Revolution. They were sent out there. The Red Guard, which is this wave of students, were sent out to destroy capitalism. What they ended up doing was destroying capitalists. and they pilloried the capitalists. So when you mobilize the mob, especially a young mob, to go after whiteness, they don't see, okay, we're gonna make this system a very complex system in order to build up these people. They're like, no, we need to topple everybody above us down. We need to topple, and in that toppling, we get high in a moral way. They become morally superior by destroying that other thing. So the liberal movement towards providing equal opportunity is at this juncture under threat by this illiberal Marxist, overthrowing of the oppressor, because the oppressor has only ever stolen from the oppressed.
Mm-hmm.
All of the wealth that is owned by white people actually belongs to everybody else because everybody else created it. And one analogy, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm very new to this. I didn't plan on being somebody that spoke about this stuff at all.
Oh,
so
dude, you and me both. I hear you.
My way into it. But if you take $1,000 from a rich man and you give that $1,000 to a poor man, that poor man will not treat the $1,000 like the rich man does. The rich man has a different way of dealing with the money. And so it's basically you teach a man to fish, right? So resources have to go into education, and education needs to be central to this process of raising everybody up. And that education has to be founded on values of meritocracy and of hard work. There's no other way forward if you don't believe in hard work. There's no other way to participate in a society where you build your own wealth. It has to be the sweat of your brow. That's the way that you own that value. And the one thing that is first and foremost been hijacked by this ideology is the education system. The education system is what is now completely controlled by the ideology that wants to tear down meritocracy and wants to hand out skills. Just wants to decouple hard work from ability and just give resources. And what they give resources, like we've been saying, they just treat the student like they're special. They treat the student like any sort of struggle that the student undergoes is not good for them. That's oppression. Struggle is oppression, when actually, in my mode of thinking of things, and this might just be outdated, struggle is actually how you achieve. Like, you cannot become a hero without struggle. So even if you think of your struggles as oppression, you're going to be putting all of your agency into the hands of somebody above you or greater than you. You don't actually gain your own skill base. You just go around tearing everything down. So yes, the project of the cathedral of America is civil rights. And that project is now under threat by something that just wants to tear everything down because it conceives of everything as evil, every structure as inherently oppressive. And they think that they can just destroy it, and in the rubble, this new growth will occur. I argue against that. It doesn't happen that way. That's not how things work.
I want to put a really fine point on this, because I think this is a really important concept for people to understand. And I also want to make sure that I'm getting it correctly. So going back to the example of when I went to teach in this rural school in college, and there was fundamental disparity between the Black people in town and the white people in town. Maybe my position as, call myself a liberal, people say I'm a classic liberal, whatever. I refuse to put the classical, modifier on it. I'm like, I've been a liberal for 20 years. I didn't change. But so the liberal thing would do would say, okay, there's a fundamental imbalance here. That's not fair. That's not good. That's not ideal for our society. How do we create situations where the Black people have the same access to opportunity as the white people, and leveling things out that way? But what's going on in our society right now is they're saying, we need to bust down those white people so they're at a lower level. And to me, that is just so sad. I mean, it's fundamentally racist on its face to say that, if you give a population of people the opportunity to go above and beyond where they are now, that they won't take advantage of it. But it just takes, there's something about putting that work in, putting that effort in, and knowing that you've earned it. When you get something, you have earned it, not because someone else was told not to participate or to dumb themselves down or any of those things. I was watching one of Stephen Crowder's Change My Mind episodes. It was about affirmative action. And he had this actually really touching conversation with this young girl who was in college. And she says, you know, without affirmative action, I wouldn't be here. And he said to her, well, you know, you took advantage of all the opportunities your town gave you. You did really well. You worked hard. Don't you want to know that you're here because you earned it? Rather than have that question in your head about, am I here just because someone gave me a spot because of the color of my skin? To me, knowing that you earned it is actually, it's part of the fulfillment. It's part of having, you know, a purpose.
Yeah. If you look at, and that's why it's so disturbing, I think, to us Gen Xers, who have these values that predate and that are under assault, where you have that girl who might have that question, like, did I actually earn this? Is this just handed out? And then you have this other type of person that is put in that situation and says, of course, has this entitlement about that reinforces their entitlement. And in that video that I posted on Sunday, there's this leader of the Black Student Union who is the same character. Like, there's an archetypal structure to this narrative. If you look at the Evergreen State College, you'll find the Naima Lowe, you'll find the Brett Weinstein, you'll find the George Bridges, you'll find the Benjamin Boyce, and you'll find all these other characters. And one other central character is this kid named Jamil. And, you know, all apologies to Jamil. I hope he's matured beyond this point, but he gets so inflamed by this attention and this protest. And he's this black young man. He's probably 24. And he's stunningly beautiful. He's a model in a way. Like just physically, he's very, you know, comely and handsome. And he adopts like this kind of pseudo trans identity called a femme, you know, like, so he's a black femme, which puts him above the black man, because the black man is lower on the hierarchy. The black woman's on top, but the black femme is right below him. So, but he is just a flaming theatrical individual, a student of Naima Lowe, and he's leading the protesters, and he's going around and giving people orders on how to take hostages and who to detain and where and what you know, what to block and what not to block and stuff like that. And there's this entitlement when he's asked by a reporter, like, what are you doing? He's like, well, we're here and we're just taking back the college because we paid for this, and we're just doing what we have to do. And then there's all these, in one of the last episode I did, episode 20, he's making all these Facebook posts about how nobody likes his selfies. They only like his political posts, and like, how hard is it to just like my selfies? And he's like rubbing himself the whole time, like, and he's all oily, and he is taken, and again, it's that narcissistic personality. Like, one way to overcome that question of whether or not you're worthy is to just skip the fact and say, no, it's my time. Yes, I am worthy. Like, and so you kind of double down on that question instead of like facing that uncomfortableness of, was I given a free ride? It's like, no, of course I'm given a free ride. I deserve this and a whole lot more, and I'm going to get it. I'm going to get it. So again, where's the checks and balances? And if we're going along with affirmative action, if we're going along with the classical liberal project of actually trying to relegate in a wise way resources so that people in our country who are historically or presently have a rough go of it and need a leg up, what you do is you inspire civic mindedness. You make the white people want to give and want to lift up everybody. And this Robin DiAngelo white fragility stuff does do that, but by hijacking and turning dark the entire project of generosity of spirit, of civic mindedness. We're all in this together. The goal, the old goal, the Martin Luther King goal was, we're all Americans. America is our ideal. I have a dream. There's this American dream. I want everybody to go towards that. This current ideology is that there's this evil God above us called America, and I want to topple him down. So everybody's collectively caught up in the mindset of one goal. It's all one goal, but it's the tearing that down. It's not that lifting up higher. That's what we see, and I'm sure that it's not across the board.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and guys, if you haven't watched Benjamin's full series, I strongly encourage you to do it. We're not going to recount his whole series because he has painstakingly put this series together on his channel. The link is in the description below. So I guess one of the questions I had, well, you're talking about Jamil. Like, what's so funny is he reminds me so much of these celebrities right now who have been in quarantine that are just like, they haven't been getting the attention they feel they rightfully deserve. And so they're posting this crazy stuff online. That's like Jamil, right?
Yeah. We live in an attention economy. And how long have you been doing the YouTube thing? Sorry
like a couple months. It's like not even
really?
that long. Yeah.
Oh wow, you
Yeah.
hit the ground running then.
I did. Well,
very well for a couple.
It was all an accident, but I'm enjoying it.
Well, we participate in an attention economy. You have to get attention before you can keep and then modify attention, right? So the ethics of the art form that I'm participating in as a YouTube content creator is that I have to have that flashy thumbnail and a title that is a little bit more than I actually say. Like
exactly.
I did a episode a few days ago and people really strongly reacted to it. I didn't think it was that controversial, but I said our new caste system. People thought that a couple of people thought that that was really like, why are you saying things like that? That's so egregious. But like, and I use that flashy title, and then once you get into the content, I'll have like this video clip that's completely enraging in a way, or like some sort of egregious behavior. And then I digest it in a reasonable manner. I hope so. I digest it in a chill tone and I just unravel it and make kind of a moral argument against that thing. But my content is more reasonable. But what certain people do is get caught up in that all I need to do is get the attention. So that they're just front loading that clickbait stuff, and they don't actually develop anything more than the clickbait. And the way that the economy of attention is set up right now is that you can do fine. Actually, you get more powerful if you just front load and put all your content in that one pitch, because that's what people want. So it in a way, our society, and it's greater than just critical race theory. It's just our society is for years been kind of grooming itself to fit itself into a very vain, narcissistic, shallow, performative identity that is disconnected from a hard-won, difficult to manage individuality that's always under threat of being, toppled by the ego and the id and the this and the that and then the mob.
Right. And it almost seems as though these kids are coming out of, I mean, I even want to say high school, and they're trained to, I mean, frankly, like, want to be social media influencers. That's the number one career that they want. But then also they've been trained to be activists for however long. I mean, some of them now from kindergarten, they have their kindergartens that are dedicated to training kids from being activists. And I just don't know. I mean, the philosophy that I always tell people is that, it's essentially a riff on you reap what you sow, right? Your experience will reflect what you contribute to it. And I don't know what we as a collective society think we're going to get from contributing these types of elements to our experience. I mean, it just seems as though people haven't thought out to the end game. And so that leads me to another question, because like I said, I don't want to rehash your whole series because people can go watch the series for themselves. But since all of this happened at Evergreen, like 3 years ago now, the enrollment at the college has taken a tumble, hasn't it? The college is not doing well.
No, it's it's atrocious. People aren't showing up. Yeah, they can't pay people to go there.
And George is still there, but he's retiring.
He's there's a lot of weirdness to why George is there and why he stayed on, and it might not be anything, or it might be something I don't know, but he's terminated his contract voluntarily at the end of his contract and kind of made this overture of like, I am his resignation letter, he called himself wise and compassionate. He's like,
no, he didn't.
Mao. It's like Charlie Brown Mao or something like that, man. It's like,
oh my God.
He framed, like, it's his name on the document. It's his resignation letter, but he co-wrote it with like the head of the department or like the board of trustees. So it's falls in and out of third person. That sentence is in third person. We gratefully thank them for his wise and compassionate leadership during these troubled times. which is a lie, but like he also signs it too. So it's like, what the fuck, dude? There's this, it's just insane because there's these op-eds that he's published in the Seattle Times that I have documents were actually written by the marketing team. So he's a
Yeah.
plagiarist.
Yeah.
Right, he's a plagiarist. Like this man should not be anywhere near a college. So yeah, he's terminated his employment at the end of his contract on his own terms.
I'm shocked that he didn't get fired. Honestly, I don't know. I don't know what in the holy hell they were thinking keeping him on.
I don't know. It's got to be connections. It's either incompetence or malice. And you know, one truism says, "Don't attribute to malice what you can as easily attribute to incompetence." But you know, he's got his fingers in the senators, and you know, and he's got the line to the governor too. So this is a part of. There's one way of spinning it to say that Evergreen's master's programs produce teachers and public servants with highly leftist views. So what the Democrats are funding is basically a degree mill to staff up government positions and to facilitate the education of the populace in these ideas of intersectionality and stuff like that. So it's just a bet to maintain their power in a way. That's very cynical, but
How does it feel to have a degree from that school?
you know what? I think I've done good with what it's given me.
You've done great.
I think that in a way, I've taken the Evergreen model of education. I took what they said it was about, and I did that. I dug deep. I obsessed over one thing for now 3 years now. Like, and it's kind of unfortunately kind of paid off in a way, and not in a monetary sense, but like my dissertation is now is now turns out to be the roadmap for what's going to happen across the land. I have a certain amount of insight that I hope can be helpful for people who are going to now be subject to what I was subject to. And I did that. I took what Evergreen handed me. I went there to study literature. I went there to create something that was impossible to construct, like an infinitely complex story was like my dream for all time. Like I want to create a story that constantly produces more meaning and more of itself. And then I was handed this material, just like this gobs of material. And what I've tried to do is create this really complex story that still has cogency and coherency and gives people access to different motivations, different characters, different thoughts. You know, like there's all this stuff in my documentary. There's all these levels going on in it. Like there's historical stuff I bring up. There's geopolitical stuff that I bring up, you know, and then there's this philosophical, and then there's the theatrical part of it. And so I'm fine with being a graduate of Evergreen, and you know I bitched about it kind of tongue in cheek that George Bridges' name is on my document, but I'm trying to do the correct Evergreen thing. We don't get grades, and what we do is my teacher evaluates me narratively, and I evaluate my teacher. So I've thoroughly evaluated the man who has said that I'm worthy of a Bachelor of Arts degree.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there's been any sort of self-reflection of people that are still at the college about what happened and perhaps changes that might better?
There's, interestingly enough, and again, there's an ethical problem because now I have an audience that is potentially exponentially more viable than the audience of those who I critique at the Evergreen State College. But that my main professor, Lisa Sweet, my first professor, let's say, she wasn't my main professor. I moved on from her because I just couldn't handle being in that environment. But you know, she kind of defined my degree in a way that I showed up to learn about art and history and literature. And she was the teacher that says, you know, all that art, history, and literature that you want to study is actually of the devil and we need to destroy it. And I took issue with that. And that she became emblematically what I wanted to really critique and take out of the academy. Like she, in a way, symbolically, like she kind of is the network of values that I stand against. I thoroughly stand against. Somebody who's competent in her art form, but completely possessed by this idea. Anyways, she was elected to be the faculty emeritus speaker at the graduation 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago. So she gave a speech, and it was on Zoom because everything was virtual now. And she goes through and she basically justifies everything that happens. She calls out the Evergreen State College protesters as the teachers of the college, as the teachers of the teachers, as the ones who we need to follow and listen to, and how my identity is something that I need to subjugate to your identity. And there's this, one of the most epically cringy pieces of footage that I have. And if anybody out there has a very highly developed taste for cringe and like just loves to like just savor just that which causes cringe, there's this Evergreen College canoe meeting that I've posted on my channel. Oh God. And it's a church service.
It's so bad.
And it's a drum circle, and and it's a struggle session, and it's everything awful like you can imagine. And that meeting, like this penultimate piece of cringe, and I was on camera. I'm like, I can't believe they're saying this. And I'm looking around like, why are you guys so sanctimonious in here? This is awful. And she calls out that meeting as a new way forward, and that white people don't understand. Like the students, our indigenous students, gave us a new form of meeting and of proceeding with this that white people just don't. So she knew I was going to be taking and making hay with that footage. She knew she was speaking to me. I know she was speaking with, at least with my consciousness. And to answer your question, no, she's not recanted. Those who are left are the true believers, and they have weeded out, and they've done this over time. They've weeded out all dissent, or all people who have the temerity to dissent, or they've sectioned them off. They've insulated themselves so thoroughly within this ideology that all they have left is those who agree with them, and everybody on the outside is wrong, fallen, or the enemy.
So, I mean, we have a very real example right in front of us of what happens when a group of people completely just embrace this ideology unapologetically, and it's not good. One of the things I love about that canoe meeting is there's a clip in it, and I forget exactly which video it's in, but Brett Weinstein was actually at that meeting, and you have like this, there's this one shot of him where he's just looking over his shoulder and like almost disgust with the whole situation, and you just zoom in on him. It's the best thing that's ever happened.
Yeah, that was like my third video I found, because I was on camera. I'm like, the world needs to see that. So I figured out how to get that. And I'm going through, and this is really early YouTube stuff. I'm stuttering, all these weird clips. Mm-hmm. It was recorded on my phone. And I found that clip. I'm like, oh my fucking God. This is like, it's like fucking gold. Like this thing, they have no idea what they handed me. They handed me everything. They've handed me like it was like manna from heaven. It was and magic. Not just that, like it was just footage after footage after footage. And the more you look at it, like if you go through and people watch it and they get the commenters, I get a lot of comments on the series saying, well, what was the racist event? Like what actually happened? Why are they protesting? Like, why are they protesting? Why are they protesting? And I don't want to spoil it for you, but they never say. Or when they do say, it's a lie and it's a fabrication. Like, it's like there were some torn posters a year ago that actually could have just been removed because they didn't follow the actual guidelines on how to post. So like everything's fabricated.
Right. Well, and that's exactly what's going on right now. I mean, George Floyd may have been, the catalyst that started all of this, but what's going on right now has nothing to do with George Floyd at all.
I will say this is a prediction, and I've followed student unrest. Evergreen State College protest of 2017 was one example among many, and it just happened to be probably the best example and the most thoroughly recorded instance. But I watched these things happen over and over and over again. And what you're going to see too in your company, if you are somebody who's subject to this, what you're going to see is this primes the pump for a reorganization of the company, and all you need is one little spark. Somebody will draw a Nazi in poop on a wall and the whole thing will collapse. Or somebody will say the wrong thing and it'll just be like this emblematic moment. There will be one little thing that can be construed as oppressive, or somebody just has a bad human encounter, or somebody's just rude. But there will be a moment that will cause everybody's already trained for this. Everybody's already ready. This teaches everybody to be an activist, or to shut down anybody who is an activist, or to shut down yourself if you're not an activist. So what you have on the front are people who are gearing up to tear down the structure and to remake it in their image, and they're just waiting for that one thing. So what we're going to see is institution after institution have this hate crime that happens, and then this complete refiguration of the institution, this entire power grab that's masked behind a bunch of unrest.
One of my contentions in this whole thing is that the people who are doing this are very literally addicted to the emotions of anger. They're addicted to outrage. They look for it, everywhere. And I think one of the best instances that I've seen come out of your series in that, it had to do, and please correct me if I get any of this wrong, it had to do with someone writing in chalk on a wall something about Limp Bizkit, and them getting attacked for it.
Yeah.
What happened there?
Brett Weinstein did it all for the nookie.
Yeah.
That's actually that's probably the most I think it's standalone episode, but one of the most entertaining episodes is episode 20. It's the last one that I've done. I have 4 more that I need to do, but I've been distracted because everything has happened. There was one kid that said, "This is so ridiculous. They have no idea how ridiculous they're being." And he had this phrase that he taught me called "laughter corrects morals." Like, if you really want to show who has morality, you make fun of them, or something like that. It's this plasticity of plugging into the world that is completely lacking in this ideology. And speaking on a cultural level, we're primed for this because now we're so ready to cancel somebody for saying a joke, to go back through their history for 10 years and see when they said something that was off color then and edgy, but now evidence of homophobia or transphobia or racism or sexism or all these different sins that are now the call of the day to purge from ourselves. And so what Nolan did was just kind of showed them how ridiculous they're being, instituting segregation, telling white people to get them water, telling white people to get up front and guard them from the police, or get to the back and stand while we sit down, doing all this thing, taking over the campus in the name of justice, taking hostages in the name of justice, acting like complete criminals in the name of justice, and then being excused by the administration. So he just started writing in chalk, like, Fred Durst needs to make a comeback, and Lip Biscuit, or it's just like ridiculousness. And then oh man, there's so many things I can say. There's these couple characters who are absolutely fascinating characters. There's this one kid he's not a kid actually. There's this one student in a wheelchair who's black and trans and disabled. And then he has a henchman who's also trans. And they are actually in every single protest. And they're very horrible communicators, but very good performers. They actually showed up at an Olympic Council meeting a few months ago. And if you see the footage of that, it's just hilarious, like how they act. It's just,
I'm seeing it. It's crazy.
It's just so insane. And you're like, I can't make fun of that, but like, there's no other way to interpret that as absolutely ridiculous. And I think it was Matt Christensen who he was listening to the footage where they said that they are overthrowing the government for the sake of black trans disabled individuals. And Matt Christensen, he's another YouTuber, he crunched the numbers on that, and it's like this astronomical chance that there's a black trans disabled individual that they're fighting for, and like he's actually like there's actually this perfect example who's a complete tyrant. He's a complete tyrant. I don't know where I was going with that, but it's interesting that in the name of actually feeding upon our sensibilities as a country, to actually simply to change our language, to not say retarded, right? To just not say that, because that's actually, it's dehumanizing to somebody with a learning disability, and so we're kind of trained to like look away or to defer to the underdog, right? And there's a certain sort of person who will take that underdog status and become a tyrant. And you see an overrepresentative sample of that in the Evergreen State College footage. It's highly representative. You have Naima Lowe and R. Rushit and Jamil, and you have all these different characters who are just kind of come together at the right moment with this right ideology. And they really take this ideology all the way to its end goal. So it really shows that all these ideas that feel uncomfortable, and then Robin DiAngelo says, if you're not uncomfortable, you're not doing it right.
No, not doing the work.
Like cognitive dissonance is a manner to know that you are entering the kingdom of heaven, like this sinuous freaking serpent that she is. But you really do see, I really do think that it is the test case of this stuff, and it won't happen similarly in every instance, but it will lead us to, at least if your company becomes infected with this, at the least it's going to take resources and diminish your product. It will not be good for efficiency.
No, it's not going to be good for efficiency at all. And what actually worries me the most about inserting this into companies is that we know, and we've known this for a really long time, about 20, 30 years or so, that the number one driver of performance in a company, that's bottom line business performance, is psychological safety on the team, which is essentially that people trust one another. They know they're not going to get thrown under the bus. They can communicate openly. They're having productive conflict. And these are all things that I can measure. These are all things we can assess. These are all things that we can train on. In fact, it's funny. There's a document going around that the city of Seattle used, actually, about how white supremacy is infused into organizations, and it's like a 6-page document where like outlining all the white supremacist parts of an organization. And I went through it, and you can equate every single one of those things to different work styles. That's all it is. It has nothing to do with race at all. And there are millions of these assessments, that are done around the world every year that will tell us this literally has nothing to do with race. It has to do with your preferences and tendencies and your communication style and that sort of thing. And so when we're talking about infusing this into organizations, it is going to destroy team psychological safety, because they're all going to be tattling on each other, and then they're all going to be constantly questioning in their head, can I say this word and not this word, and how do I communicate with this coworker because they're Black, and if I have Black employees working for me, can I actually even ask them to do their jobs, or is that going to be oppressive to them? It's going to destroy team connection in organizations, and it's
gonna do the cultural revolution on the level of the civis. And on the level of the corporation, it's gonna recreate Chernobyl. That's what it's gonna do. Yes. It's gonna cause the breakdown of communication and the depletion of efficiency and competency. Like it favors a certain sort of competence, which maybe I'm wrong here. I keep on saying narcissistic sociopaths, but there's a certain personality that will get along fine in this environment, and they are actually if constellated correctly, those personalities, if they are given the right checks and balances, actually do a lot of work to produce good things for the company. There's a reason why CEOs are psychopaths, but the CEO is actually doing really doing good in a way for the shareholders. I'm sure we can argue about that and stuff.
Yeah. Well, and no, it's actually funny. And I've actually made this argument too, which is, so I use the DISC model when I'm doing psychological assessments in the workplace. And there's one style in the DISC model, aptly called the dominant style, that is the style that most CEOs and executives have. It's like that natural leadership style, the big picture people, the people that have these great visions and then drive their employees to achieve those visions. And what I think is so ironic about this whole situation is that I think Donald Trump absolutely has the dominant work style. And the thing about the dominant work style too is that every narcissist has the high D work style, but not every high D is a narcissist. So it's very critical to have it if that's where you're going down. But so I think that Donald Trump is a narcissist, and I think he also has this high D style. I also think the leaders in the protests at Evergreen also have that high D style. So if they're creating this narrative where they're fighting the evil racist oppression of this tyrannical government, even though we know this all started before Donald Trump was in office, but they're actually fighting themselves. I mean, there's something about that projection that's going on.
There's so much projection going on. There's so much projection.
If they only understood.
So this I want us to have a conversation on my channel about this work and about team building and about how this stuff is so corrosive. This is the stuff that people need to hear, and hopefully, like, after explaining it, we can maybe kind of come towards counters to this, because this is the question now. This is the question I've been trying to approach this the whole time. It's that we can spend all our time deriding the social justice warriors and making hay with all of their behavior,
Yeah.
but why do people get swept up in that?
Mm-hmm.
How do we change people's minds? How do we give people counters to, within their bounds of being polite, still stand up for themselves? Because that's what's needed.
I completely agree. And I thought that it was a really apt point that you recently made in a live stream you did with James Lindsay and Mike, I think, as well, where you all were talking about how when the organizations came out with all these Black Lives Matter statements, it was like someone had distributed that and all of them were cutting and pasting. And I thought that that was a really apt point that I hadn't thought about. And one of the things that I'm working on developing is actually a real diversity statement that includes, other types of diversity that are not race and gender, but diversity of thought, diversity of approach, even making sure you're enumerating that you can have differences of opinion when it comes to politics. Vote for whoever you want. We don't care as long as you come in and you're doing your job, because a lot of people are losing their jobs right now just for supporting Donald Trump, or a rumor that they might support Donald Trump.
Somebody who liked Donald Trump now, if you were seeing associated with somebody.
There was a woman, and I don't know much about Magic the Gathering other than my brother used to play it, but there was a woman that did illustrations for those cards that just got fired from her job for liking tweets from Mike Cernovich or following Mike Cernovich on Twitter.
Worse than that, or different than that, she wasn't fired. She just doesn't get any more commissions, but they're going through and taking her stuff out. They're actually recalling cards.
So nuts.
And you can make an argument for or against that, but Tina Fey's now retracting blackface episodes from 30 Rock, and a lot of companies are going through and scanning their, the cultural revolution's happening. We're now watching people mess around with cultural artifacts, and it's not just the people in the street. It's the corporations. This is the weird thing about this revolution. It is top down. It's top down. It just it's mobilizing people to make it look like it's bottom up. But this is certainly playing into the hands. I'm sorry, I don't know. I shouldn't be talking about this because I'm not a master in this, but it really does seem that this is all attuned to get people in power in this election cycle and to ameliorate and facilitate the expansion of China. I really think that there's a lot of, because if you actually look at major universities, they have floors dedicated to Chinese studies. And if you look at their output on what people are actually learning, like in Portland State University, they have an entire floor of the Chinese given to the Chinese, and there's 2 classes that this floor produces. There's people in America that are actually watching it's an extension of the Chinese government. And even if it's not, this can't be good for America. This can't be good for America on a geopolitical level. This stuff it might be the beginning of the collapse of the empire, and it might be good that we need to, it might be a good thing to do, but the outcome of this will be a civil, not just civil unrest, but the tearing apart of the fabric of our civilization, of our ability to trust one another.
If we win this particular battle, it is my greatest hope that the higher education system in this country gets burnt to the ground. I really do.
Technology. People are the amount that you can learn on YouTube dwarfs anything that you can learn in a classroom. The only thing that we don't have with regards to digital teaching is that in-person experience, is that embodied experience, which is necessary. But that embodied experience is now being stacked with a lot of money and with a lot of debt that actually just goes to administrators' overpriced salaries, and then all this thought control and all this illiberal education, all this indoctrination on a number of different levels. So there's an argument to be had, and there's a way forward, but education certainly needs to change.
Definitely. Benjamin, I have just a couple questions that were sent in, and I want to make sure we get to them before we conclude. One is from a super chat from earlier, and I'm sorry I didn't get to it earlier, but I wanted to save it. They asked, how will this play out in the minds of the youth of today? Will they see through this duplicitous ideology, or will they fall in line?
I did want to bring that up. So if you look at what happened at the Cultural Revolution, there was this one generation that was mobilized by Chairman Mao, and they had this red book, and they're the ones who went down and tore all the monuments down, and they lambasted their teachers and, slaughtered people, or very openly oppressed people for not following the party line. That generation ended up being absolutely despised by their children and by the older generations. So this is not going to come down good for this one generation that's possessed by this, unfortunately. And so in aggregate, I think it's probably going to fall. We'll see on which generation is going to be blamed for this, but probably the millennials or Gen Z. It doesn't really matter. But the people who are participating in this, and it's not just rioters in the streets. There are, I've seen reports and like anecdotally, and it's been written up in the New York Times, what high school and college students are doing now is policing one another and are slandering one another and are turning one another in. This is possessed an entire generation, and it's going to take a while to work itself out. So what I've been trying to do is, kind of tithe a portion of my videos, either numerically or a portion content of my videos, to kind of talk to young people, to talk to artists specifically, because that's kind of who I care about, because that's my bias. And just kind of give them courage, give them the capacity to think outside, to say, you don't need the big numbers. You don't need a social life. You don't need people agreeing with you to pursue greatness and to pursue the beautiful. And I believe in the greatness. I believe in beauty. I believe in justice, true justice. How we get to it, I don't know, but I believe in these core values of thinking through things and of play. Like, I believe in playfulness. I believe in humor, and these people don't. These people are not playful, and so they will choke you. They will choke you out. So you play if you have to play by yourself, but you're not alone, So I really do think that if we can frame things in terms of the values or the drives or the desires of what young people want and say, okay, listen, this stuff isn't actually going to give you that. There's this other stuff that's actually, it's got a long pedigree, and it's got a lot of great people that have accumulated over the centuries that it's been developed, that there's this other way of doing things,
One of the things that I think is a saving grace for me in this scenario is that it's looking more and more like Gen Z is really going to start emulating like the greatest generation. And so they're kind of looking at the millennials right now and going, you all are acting insane. And so in this case, they really might be our saviors in this whole scenario.
Yeah. Well, there's a question of the pendulum swing, and people worry about the pendulum swing coming from the militant right. But I'm more generous, and I think it's going to be an attitudinal change on a generational level. Like, people are going to get really tired of this from the inside and disgusted with this on the outside, and it's going to collapse under its own weight. The question is, how many businesses are going to be ruined before it runs its course?
The thing of it is I don't even feel sorry for them at this point, because they're all, listen, no businesses actually care about this stuff. This is the thing. They're only doing this because they're pandering to the mob. That is the only reason that any of these statements are being made, or any of the tens of thousands of dollars are being invested in this anti-racism training. It's just to pander and to say we did something. And so I have absolutely zero sympathy if this sinks these organizations, because there have been people like me that have been shouting that this is not a good idea. Do not do this. And they're going and doing it anyway. So you reap what you sow, man.
There we go.
All right, got a couple more questions. This is from Pink Anime Fox, who is a member of my locals community. And she asks, my number one question is, what are the Trojan horses in language, actions, policies, etc., which, by sounding good to most fair-minded people, allow the critical mob to gain influence and infect the institutional power structures?
So I don't know a litmus test for the thought terminating cliche. That's one way of saying that, kind of naming this concept. There's these statements that come out that shut down discourse, that shut down critical thinking, and sometimes they're words, sometimes there's phrases, and you can find them because they just don't make sense if you actually play with them. And that's kind of my mode. Like, let's just play with the idea and see where it goes. Like, if I interact with it in the right way, and you'll see that people will get really defensive if you start teasing apart certain ideas. Fragility. It was very, in one episode, I pointed out that there's this truism that if you want to know who's in power, ask who you can't make fun of. And that applies to the hashtag. And Black Lives Matter is a hashtag that you can't. It's sacred now. It's a totem now that you have to agree with. And if you don't, or if you variate from that, that is cause to kind of cudgel you with it. So I think we can go through and try to list some, but if you just pay attention to what the way that when a term comes out, and the way that everybody who agrees with this entire thing gets really rigid about it, or very sanctimonious about it, or if anybody questions it, you can feel like there's these sacred pieces of this ideology. And I think on one level there's this kind of unconscious fetishization of it and this totemization of it, but there's also this defense of it, because actually that's a place where this entire thing would unravel. This is a weak point in this thing. So you can kind of feel that out in the way that people speak and talk, and just by watching their behavior, and how you're allowed to interact with that idea.
Okay. And then Lyndon Brooke, who's also a member of my locals, she's asking about violence. And I know this is something that I've heard from a lot of people on the conservative side of the spectrum, is that they don't want to get involved because they're afraid that people are going to be violent towards them and their kids. And she says, I'm just wondering if you feel more concerned about the possibility of physical violence on the outside looking in. And I think she's referring to your experiences there, maybe when you were a student and were seeing all this unfold. What was that like?
Okay, so the interesting thing is that there was no actual, there was only one actual assault that happened during this 2 or 3 week window that I'm treating in the documentary. And that happened in the middle of the night when the noodly armed, pronoun specifying bat mob assaulted the We Want Class chalk team, while the actual Atomwaffen neo-Nazis were tagging the campus, trolling the campus or whatever. So they got right up to the line of violence. Now, when you look at footage in the street, that's not going to be the case. I don't know how to. Am I personally scared of violence?
Yeah.
I'm a little bit worrisome, because this facilitates unhinged behavior. This is actually being taken advantage of by young men specifically, who are now they cover their face. So they become, once they do that, they can't be seen, and they stop seeing themselves. They stop really looking at their behavior, and they just kind of run with the mob. So there is an aspect on the Antifa level that facilitates violence. I'm much more concerned with institutional violence, with the squashing of the functioning of teams, and the destruction of careers, and what the violence that's being enacted on the sacred institution of educating people. That's kind of like the violence that I'm disturbed by, or the violence that's allowed to happen to our artifacts. The process of revising our history to really say, okay, maybe these slaveholders shouldn't be celebrated. Maybe we need to go through that. That's one thing. Maybe let's destroy the slave monger. Let's destroy Columbus. Let's just destroy everything. It's like, okay, well, that level of violence I don't think is actually productive, and is just destructive.
All right. And then Ian has a very important question. Have you named the deer?
Well, I would have to tag the deer, wouldn't I, Ian? Should I get no, I'm not going to shoot them with a dart, have them put to sleep, and then I could I don't know them enough to individualize them. There's probably 3 or 4 deer that come through. I mean, this is there's a lot of deer, so I haven't. I just deer.
Well, we'll work on that. I'm a big fan of I'm a big fan of animals that have names of different animals. So I once had a ferret that I named Monkey, just because it really amused me. So right. maybe you can name the deer Cat.
Okay. All right. Would I have to name the cat Deer, or is it just a one-way thing? It's just only outsiders are named.
Maybe we can say the deer is oppressed in this circumstance because they live outside and the cat gets to come inside. So it only goes one direction.
Yeah, they have a sacred life out here. They're allowed to be eaten that much. So.
Wow, that's good for them then. Benjamin, thank you so much for coming on my channel. I really
My pleasure.
appreciate it. And apparently we will be doing this on your channel at some point as well. Maybe can we talk about knitting on your channel too, and the knitting crazy?
Yeah. We'll do the is there a cool word for the knitastrophe or something like that?
Well, I call it the knitting wars.
Knitting wars, okay.
Yeah. So, but apparently we could call it knitting gate too, but we never quite got. We never quite got there.
You'll see, this is the thing. There's an underrepresentation of men, and therefore an underrepresentation of punnage, probably in this movement. So you don't.
Yeah.
No.
We'll work on that. We'll work on developing a name for it. Where can people find you?
On Twitter, I do a lot of evening Twitter tweets because I'm grilling a lot right now. This is the way that I take my mind off of this catastrophe that I'm watching unfold. And so it's Benjamin A. Boyce on Twitter, and YouTube is Benjamin A. Boyce. And I'm also on ThinkSpot at Benjamin Boyce.
Excellent. Excellent. And I believe I put everything in the description below, guys. So if you liked our little chat today, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel. Double check to make sure you're still subscribed if you think you're subscribed already, because YouTube shenanigans.
Shenanigans for sure.
And so this is actually not my last live stream this week, folks. So I have one more tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern with Dr. Howard Asher, and it is going to be our third in a series of discussions about Trump derangement syndrome being a real thing. And so we're looking at it from a psychological perspective, and Howard is always a good time. So please come and join us for that. All right, Benjamin, that's all I have. Anything else you want to add for the good of the order?
No, I'm good. I'm good. That phrase creeps me out, though. Is that like a Templar thing, or like Freemason? Is that how they say it?
I think so. I don't know. I just think it kind of sounds cool, but maybe not. Maybe I'll have to change it. For the good of the order. For the good of the order. All right, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you for hanging out.
Ciao.